We're in this series talking about learning to love. Now, we've seen and stressed the importance of love. We said, okay, what is the greatest commandment? And of course, God told us, Jesus told us to love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, with all your strength, and your neighbor is yourself. And then we talked about the idea, he says, a new commandment I give unto you. Well, what was that new commandment? That you love one another. Then we looked at 1 Corinthians 13. Now abideth faith, hope, and love. And then he goes on to say, the greatest of these is love. We have on the door when you come in the hallway here, that our desire, our goal for this church is to live and love like Jesus. And that's what we want to do. Now we're in the process, though, in this series, of actually looking at what love does, what it is in action. How does it act? And we talk about love, but a lot of people, the people that are talking about the love the most, don't really explain to you what love is. And so that's what we've been doing. That's what we're doing now. We're in the process of seeing what it does and how it acts and what we're supposed to do with it. And one of the things that we say, when you love someone, God says, here is how you can really tell when someone says that they love you. Look at 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Go through all these different things. If you want to know if someone really loves you, look at these things, these attributes of love. There's some things that love does, and we saw one of the, in our last lesson, we said that love is kind. That if you really love someone, you'll be a kind person. This morning we begin to see what love does not do. There's a negative, I forgot my remote. There's a negative to love, and there's a positive to love. And we're seeing the negative today. We said that love does not envy. Love does not envy. The church at Corinth had a real problem of envying one another. We need to begin by thinking about what envy is. Strong's and Thayer's would say that envy is to be jealous over something someone else has. The words used in 1 Corinthians is translated jealousy, envy, covet. Now let me give you another definition of envy. It's resenting God's goodness to others and ignoring God's goodness to ourselves. Again, it is resenting God's goodness to others and ignoring God's goodness to me. And listen, the Bible makes it very clear that envy is a terrible sin. And so when he gives us this description of love, we want to live and love like Jesus. If we're going to live and love like Jesus, we're going to have to get down what love really is, how it acts, how it responds, what it does. And he tells us, in fact, it's behind many of the sins that we commit is envy. Look at what he says. James chapter 3, verse 16, he says, wherever there is envy, you'll find every kind of evil. I've seen that so. Or how about this one? In Ecclesiastes 4 and verse 4, I've learned why people work so hard to succeed. It's because they envy the things their neighbors have. There are people who work themselves to death because they want to keep up with the Joneses. They do everything they can to try to keep up with everybody else because they envy what they have. They want to be just like them. They want to have, and so they try to keep up with the Joneses, and about the time they catch up, the Joneses refinance. You can't do it. And then Proverbs chapter 14, verse 30 says, a heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. Now, sometimes you learn what to do by looking at what not to do. And in this particular verse, that's what Jesus is saying. In the parable of the vineyard, you remember that story about some workers that had come in? Jesus tells a story about some people who were there in that particular story who were envious. In the story, a farmer goes out 5 different times to get people to work in his field. He starts with one of the workers, and he starts the day, and then he goes out 4 more times and hires 4 other groups of workers. The first group, he says, I'll pay you a set wage. They make an agreement. I will pay you this much. You come work for me today, and I'll do it. And they agree on a wage. Later in the day, he goes to a second group of workers, and he says, at the end of the day, I'll pay you what's fair. They didn't even agree what they're going to get. He just says, I'll pay you what's fair. They trusted him to do what was right. And so they made this agreement. They went on. They don't even argue over the amount. They just go to work. They're trusting in his generosity to be fair. During the day, he goes out again and again and again, and he gets other groups to come in. Well, at the end of the day, he decides to pay the people that he hired last first. And he decides to pay every one of them the same amount. They come in, the ones that had come in, there was one that just came in the last hour of their day. He didn't pay the people who worked all day any less than what he'd agreed on. He gave them what he had agreed to pay. They got exactly what they contracted for. What made them upset was the other people were given what these guys felt like they didn't deserve. We contracted this money out. We came in early today, and we worked all day. And at the end of the day, we got what you said you was going to pay us. This is what we agreed on. Isn't that right? Yeah. But they were envious of the fact that the other guys got paid the same amount that they got paid, even though they didn't work as long as they did. So we see envy. Now, what did I say envy is? Resenting God's goodness on others and ignoring God's goodness to me. In this story, I think we see several antidotes to envy. First one I want us to see is stop comparing yourselves to others. If you want to get over envy, if you want to not let envy take control of your life, you need to stop comparing yourself to somebody else. Don't we do that so much today? Comparing is the root of all envy. And comparing was the very first mistake made by these workers. They began to look at these others. Look at what he says here in Matthew chapter 29 and 10. It says, those hired last came up and were each given $1. When those who were hired first saw that, they assumed that they would get more. In other words, they started making comparisons. Well, look at what these guys got. If these guys got, well, this is what we agreed to get paid this much. But look, these guys are coming in. They're paying them more. They assumed that, well, hey, they're going to pay me more. This is going to be great. This is it. They only worked an hour, and so that means we're going to get more. That's what they thought. You start comparing yourself with what they have, where they live, what they drive, what gift they have, and you're headed for envy. That's where you're headed. When you start comparing yourself to somebody else, 1 Corinthians or 2 Corinthians chapter 10 and verse 12 says, we do not dare to clarify or compare ourselves with some who commend themselves. When they measure themselves by themselves and compare themselves, he says, what? They are not wise. You should never compare yourself with anybody else for two reasons. Number one, you were made unique. There's nobody else like you. You can't compare yourself with somebody else because you don't have, that's comparing apples to oranges. You're not like everybody else. You're different. So you don't need to compare yourself with somebody else. There's nobody in the world exactly like you. And number two, if you start comparing, it's always going to lead to one of two sins: pride or envy. If you start comparing, it's going to lead to one or two sins: pride or envy. You're going to say, you know what? I may be bad, but I'm not nearly as bad as so-and-so. I may not be, but look at so-and-so. Some of you kids pull that on your parents, don't you, sometimes? You want to get something and say, well, now, Mom and Dad, I know, but, but look, so-and-so here at school, he does this and this and this and this. You're lucky to have me. You ever do that? Oh, yeah, I know he does. I can tell by his look. Sure he does. But isn't that what we do, though? And we get prideful. I'm not as bad. Well, when I looked at this guy down here, that's what they do, And I'm going to tell you, get prideful. If you want to compare yourself with somebody else, you just get down there and you measure yourself with somebody else. You get down in the ditch with that good-for-nothing, low-life person, and you measure yourself, I feel pretty good. I'm not as bad as he is. Or you can become envious. Oh, I could never do as good. That person just thinks they're so much better than I am because they're so talented in all these areas. They're able to make money. They're able to do this. They're able to do that. And don't you just hate them? And you start comparison. Love people. Learn from people. It's always going to lead to, again, if you're not careful, it's going to lead to two sins if you don't. But you need to learn from people and love people. You don't compare yourself with other people. That is the first antidote to envy. Now, the second thing you need to do is you need to start enjoying God's grace to others. When you see God being kind and good and gracious to others, you need to start celebrating that. That's awesome. You need to be happy when God is blessing somebody else. Now, I know that doesn't come naturally. You have to learn it. You have to learn to rejoice with other people's blessings. You know, it's the exact opposite of what those workers did in Matthew chapter 20. They went out and they worked all day and they were paid exactly what they were agreed for. They didn't get gypped. They had agreed to make that much money and they were glad to do that from the beginning. They were chosen. They did it. They weren't cheated. They just resented others being given just as much. And instead of enjoying it, they resented it. Matthew 20, 10 and 11 and verse 15 says, the workers who had been hired first thought that they would be giving more than the others. But when they were given the same, they began complaining to the owner of the vineyard. He said, are you envious because I'm generous to them? You know, we read in Romans chapter 12 and verse 15. We use this verse, by the way, on kindness. But the first part of it says, rejoice with those that rejoice. Now, last study, we looked at the second half of that verse where it says, weep with those that weep. But in this verse, it says, rejoice with those that rejoice. Have you ever noticed the second half of that verse is a whole lot easier to do than the first half? Seriously. It's a whole lot easier to weep with them that weep than it is to rejoice with them that rejoice. I don't know why it is so easy to weep with those that weep. That's an element of kindness. Love is kind. But listen, it's not always easy to rejoice with those that rejoice. For some reason, we don't handle the success of others very well. When somebody else gets good, we think, man, that could have been me. That should have been me. In fact, sometimes we even feel threatened by it, don't we? Sometimes we resent it. It's because we don't, they don't deserve it. They didn't deserve that. Why should they be blessed? It's because we've done more than they have done, and now they're being blessed and we're not. And we think somehow that, it's because somehow in our minds we think that the world's some great big giant apple pie. And if they get a big slice of apple pie, then that means my slice is going to be smaller. Isn't that what we think? And if your slice gets a little bigger than mine, that means my slice is going to be a little smaller. And there's always two choices that you have when good things happen to other people. You could choose to resent or you could choose to rejoice. The good news is that if you learn to rejoice at God's goodness to others, you'll have a lot more to be happy about. But I don't know why we do that, don't we? I mean, when someone else, now we can weep with those that weep. Oh man, isn't that sad? They just, they had I hate that. That happened to them. In reality, you're saying to yourself, and I sure am glad that it didn't happen to me. Maybe that's the reason it's easier to weep with those that weep. But then when someone does something good, I don't know why it is, but the normal tendency is to resent that they got that because they didn't deserve it and I did. There's always two choices, and you need to make those. The good news is you need to learn to rejoice and be happy when somebody else gets good. When a sorrow is shared, it's cut in half. When joy is shared, it's doubled. We need to learn to rejoice with those that rejoice. Weep with those that weep. Start enjoying God's grace to others. The third thing you need to do if you want to conquer resentment is be grateful for what you have. Instead of focusing so much on what you don't have, and what didn't happen, be grateful for what you got. I think this doesn't come naturally either. I mean, it has to be learned. Paul said, what did he say? I have learned, and whatever condition I'm in to therewith be content. I have learned. It's something you got to learn to do. It's not something that comes natural. We don't like it. We want to, we think, that's the reason I think there's so much trouble in the world today is so many people think they ought to have everything that everybody else has. And they resent when somebody does good and they don't appreciate what they've got. You young people, listen, these older people didn't get what they get overnight. It took them years to get what they got. You're 20 years old thinking you should have everything they got and you resent the fact that they've got it and you don't. Honestly, and I hate to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and do it anyway. You just forgive me. Just say bless his heart when I get done. But that's the reason the Socialist Party is getting such a big push in the country today is because there's so many people out there that's looking at the success of other people and they're saying, rather than working for it and doing it, I deserve it. I should have it. They shouldn't have it, and they resent the fact that somebody else has worked hard to get it, and that's the reason, and they want to get it. But they don't want to do what it takes to get it. They think you should just give it to them, and they resent. They envy those that succeed. Parents, I hope you, by the way, and I'll just throw this out, it won't cost you anything extra. Talk to your kids about it. Because I'm amazed at how many have bought into this socialist idea of society that, what's mine is mine and what's yours is mine too. If you've got more than I do, we need to equalize it all. That's ridiculous. But that's what happens. But what we need to do is learn to be content. So instead of complaining like these workers in Matthew chapter 20 did when about what wasn't happening, what they didn't get. We need to learn to realize that we would have nothing without God, without His grace, and without His love, and without His kindness and His goodness towards us in all things. 1 Corinthians 4 verse 7 says this. Who says you're better than others? What do you have that was not given to you? And if it was given to you, why do you brag as if you did not receive it as a gift? I love that. Ecclesiastes 6 and verse 9 says this. It's better to see what you have than to want more. Wanting more is useless, like chasing the wind. Be grateful for what you have. I might need to add this. Envy is not having a desire, a dream, a goal. It's good to have those things. Some people think, oh, you're saying I shouldn't dream, I shouldn't have a goal, I shouldn't have a desire. No, you need to desire good things and you need to desire great things and you need to have great plans for your life and you need to get out there and do what it takes to get whatever it is that you think you need to have. It's good to have those things, but envy is not that. Envy is resenting someone else who already has what you desire or dream or want. Envy is caused by not being thankful for what you already have. Number 4, learn to trust God when life seems unfair. By the way, the thing that used to drive me the craziest, my kids were not allowed to do this. They were never allowed to say, but that's unfair. Because you know what I would tell them? Welcome to life. Because life's not always fair. But who are you to decide what's fair and what's not fair? It seems unfair to these workers, didn't it? And I can understand their thinking. You think about it, I can understand their thinking. I went out here, I worked hard all day, and I agreed for this amount of money, and you gave me this amount of money, but there's a guy that came an hour ago, and you paid him the same thing you paid me. I can understand that, can't you? I can understand where they're coming from. That's the scary part to me is I can actually understand what they're saying. Because, hey, I worked hard today. It was hot. I got out here and I did whatever it took, and this guy only worked an hour and you paid him the same thing you paid me. They were envious of those who were paid the same that they were paid. But I want you to see something. They also had a problem with the owner of the vineyard. Not only did they have a problem with the people that got got more than they, or as much as they got. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 12, it says this. It says, the last workers put in only 1 hour, and yet you have made them equal to us, we who slaved all day under the scorching sun. In Matthew 20, verse 13, he replies, the owner, friends, I didn't cheat you. I paid you exactly what you agreed on. What business is it of yours if I want to pay them the same that I paid you? Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Well, that is so apolitical. I mean, isn't that kind of signs of the times? You know, are you envious because I'm generous? That's basically what he's saying. God knows what he's doing. You know, we could, take this and turn it around when we see God blessing somebody else. Don't we do the same thing? But God, I've been working hard. God, I've been good. God, I haven't gone out here and done all these bad things. And look at this person out here. He's blessed and he's got so much, and I deserve it. I should have got it. I've worked so hard. I've been in your kingdom. I have actually had people who resented the fact that someone obeyed the gospel and died. Seriously. I've been a Christian for 50 years. And he just gets right in the kingdom? That just doesn't seem fair. And I had a guy I taught the gospel to, and he was sick, went to the hospital, and he said, listen, I think I'm dying. And I want you to, I've been in drugs, I've done this thing, I've done that thing. And he said, I want to be right with God. So I studied with him, baptized him. The hospital made arrangements where I could baptize him, baptized him, got him up. I heard him in through the bathroom door saying, man, I wished I could go and tell all my friends this is the best feeling I've ever had in my life. He came out the door. I walked into the bed, helped him get to the bed. He got up in the bed, fell over dead. Man, I've been doing this for 60 years. How unfair. This guy just walks right in the kingdom. What's the difference? We need to be careful. Envy is a fever. Doubting God is the infection. We need to trust God and his love, even especially when life seems unfair. There are going to be people who you wonder, how in the world can they be blessed? You know what he said? He knows, Jesus told us, he said, he knows our life consists of, and he knows all the ins and outs, the past and futures of my life. Here's what he said here in Luke chapter 12, verse 15. He says, for one's life does not consist on the abundance of the things which he possesses. If that's how you're measuring your life, you're measuring on the wrong things. But that's what we do. We envy somebody. I see people who look at other people and they say, man, they've got all this and they've got all that, and I don't have all this and I don't have all that. I'm just glad they invite me over. The ones that got that, all that. Of course, I've got more than I ever have. But I've seen some that think, man, they just, I don't know. Why can't we be happy when someone's blessed? Honestly, I think I would be happy if every one of y'all were millionaires. If every one of y'all was millionaires, because I know I'd get a raise. You know what I mean? So you rejoice. If we had a bunch of millionaires in this church, that means there's so much more stuff we could do. But, a lot of times that's not how we feel about it. We feel, wow, I know how they got it. That's first. The Russians were the worst. They thought if anybody got anything, they must have done it because they were dishonest. Because God don't just bless you unless you've got to go out here. And if they got it and didn't deserve it, they must have been dishonest. Again, we need to trust God and his love, even when it doesn't seem fair. Keep focused. Then the final thing is keep focused on God's plan for your life. Keep focused on God's plan for you. Don't get distracted by what's going on in other people's lives. Center on God's will for your life. There's a simple phrase in the story that the owner says as they were grumbling and griping about not getting what they thought they ought to get. There's one simple phrase that stands out there. In Matthew chapter 20, verse 14, I love this. He says this. He says, the owner says, take your money now and go. You know what he's saying? Get a life. It's time to move on. It's time to go to the next step in your life. Pity party time is over. You got what was fair. It wasn't you were mistreated. It wasn't, so take what's yours and just go. I mean, how ridiculous. But that's us. Sometimes we get stuck in the past. Listen, I'm going to tell you what. There's some of you who are still envying that person who got the prom queen 40 years ago. I mean, we get stuck on what we didn't get. How come I didn't get picked? I mean, you go back 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago over the things that happened then that somebody else got that you thought you should have got, and you can't get over it. Well, let me give you some good advice. Get over it. You think, why it didn't happen? Or we think about, what we deserved. And that we can't see God's plan in our lives because we're looking at all that other stuff. He still has an incredible plan for your life. But you can't see it if you're looking at what everybody else is doing. Those are the antidotes for the disease of envy. God's plan for you is for you to be saved and for you to serve. And He'll help you do that. God will show you the ultimate end of love. Again, 1 Corinthians 13, I've been giving you this description of what he talks about, what you're supposed to do in love. But actually, that is a picture of Jesus, what He did for you. Jesus didn't envy. He was kind. He wasn't proud. He wasn't boastful. He wouldn't do all these different things that he says here in 1 Corinthians chapter 13. He was all those things that you and I want to be. But you can't be that until you put on Christ. If you're here today and you've not obeyed the gospel, if you believe in Christ, willing to turn from your sins, confess your faith, be baptized for the remission of your sins, Romans chapter 6 says you put on Jesus Christ. Let's put Him on and be like Him. And then you can do away with all that envy. It doesn't happen naturally. Matter of fact, you saw most of the verses that I gave you today talked about, I have learned. It's a process. Some of you say, well, I ain't got there yet, Mitchell. That's okay. That's why we're here. If you had it all perfect, the Lord wouldn't have the church. He knows we need each other. We need to build each other. We need to encourage each other. And we need to grow up in Christ. And there's some of us, we need to get over it. And it might be getting over the obstacle that you have that stops you from coming to Jesus. It may be that something in somebody else's life. We were talking in our class today about so many different people who have been pushed away from the church because of bad actions of people in the church. I want to tell you, get over it. And not in a mean, because I don't want to underestimate the pain that you felt when someone did something that was wrong and they did something wrong. But what I'm saying is Christ is much greater than that. And Christ can use you to change that other person's life when you be the person that you ought to be. I've used this statement several times about the church. If every member of the church was just like me, what kind of church would this church be? Well, let's change it. If every member of the church was just like Jesus, what kind of church would this church be? Because that's really the kind of person that God has called us to be. He just wants you to be like Jesus. If we could help you this morning, if you need to obey the gospel, we're here for you. I added water to the baptistry this morning, so I'm ready for you. If you're here this morning and you need the prayers of the church, we can take care of that this morning. We'll pray with you and for you. And if you're 99.6 years old and you come in and we baptize you this morning, we'll rejoice. Even if you don't make it home today. I mean, we're ready for you to be a part of the kingdom. There's great things you can do. And we're glad you're here. And we want you to be a part of the kingdom. We want you to be a part of this church. And if we could help you, I want to encourage you. As we stand, we offer the invitation.